Hello, and welcome to Literacy Matters. I'm your host, Cheryl Lundy Swift, and today I'm here with Kathleen Mohr, a language and literacy professor at Utah State University. Kit, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's so great to talk to you. Kit, before we begin, can you tell me about your literacy journey?
Well, thank you. It's been a long journey, but I'm still making that walk. But I started as a kindergarten teacher in California. It was a bilingual Spanish-English program. I did that, got promoted to first grade, and eventually taught many years of first grade. Bilingual, gifted, regular, very, very special time for me as an educator. I wanted to change and move to third grade. So I taught that beginning reading and then hopefully that transitional reading and writing, very good experiences in California. I moved to Texas and was an ESL teacher coordinator for several years as well. So I spent 15 years in the classroom. And during that time, I really became interested in what do we know, what do we do, for whom, for how long, and what does the research really tell us about effective and efficient instruction, especially for the children who may need the most help or support in their own journeys. So 15 years in the classroom. In that process, I got a few graduate degrees and ended up at the university and have been doing that work since. Again, as you said, I see myself as a professor of language and literacy development and really look at these important competencies from a developmental cognitivist view. In other words, we've been given these fabulous brains to do marvelous things, and trying to understand those processes should inform instruction.
I love that. What a journey it has absolutely been. And, Kit, we've had our own journey at Learning Without Tears, and it all began with our founder, Jan Olson, who's an occupational therapist who's helped millions of students improve their print and cursive handwriting so they could use more of that brain power that you mentioned to focus on the content of their thoughts, their opinions, their ideas, right? Instead of focusing on the mechanics. But a lot of people don't really think of handwriting as a part of literacy instruction. But you happen to think that, right? Could you tell us why handwriting is an important part of early literacy instruction?
Wow, it just goes with all the other components for an integrated mechanism. So if we see humans as these marvelous language users, producers, we would want the oral language development and then eventually written language production. And that production relies on some very basic transcription skills. That's what the researchers call both handwriting and spelling. And we know that without fluent handwriting, it's really hard to get ideas down on paper and be able to think about what you want to say, how you want to say it, and be able to communicate that. So people think handwriting's gone by the wayside because of technology, but the research indicates it's still a fundamental skill that actually works to reinforce letter names, the sound correspondences, and orthographic memory for words. In other words, how do words work and look and how are they spelled? So what they call handwriting fluency is sort of a platform on which we build then the more sophisticated orthographic or literacy skills. And the research is showing that it's really very important still, that students' brains work better if they learn to write the letters as they learn the names, the sounds, they figure out the shapes and how to get those down and practice that to the point where their cognitive resources, what you call brain power, can be applied to other things. So we don't want students to be word calling or decoding words, but then not be able to also get them down on paper. So that interaction between the letter sounds, the names, the shapes, and I would say even the stroke sequence has been shown to improve or correlate how quickly students can name letters, how quickly they can decode words. So there's something in this nexus in the brain that helps students solidify their knowledge of how the written code is working. And they've seen it across languages, even in logographic languages like Chinese, that letter, stroke, and character, what they call character stroke sequences, reinforces what they know about that letter. So I wouldn't want students to go without that fundamental skill, because it helps them write faster, and then they have something to say and they can get it down on paper. We know that students who have better handwriting write more, they get better grades for their writing, they're more enthusiastic about being writers. So I think we need to find the time, make the time, and incorporate handwriting instruction as part of the program.
Wow, kid, that's fascinating. And you mentioned that whole time piece, finding the time. Our teachers and school leaders are tired. And I often hear that they just don't have the time to add one more thing to their day. And that really includes handwriting. So how can handwriting really be embedded into early literacy instruction without it feeling burdensome or feeling like a waste of precious time?
Well, I acknowledge that teachers are asked to do a lot of things, and that some of the students whom they serve can be inattentive, a little squirrely, hard to manage at times. And so they are strained by time and priorities, as well as maybe student behavior, to implement all the things they would want to in a classroom. However, I would caution teachers to seriously think, can they afford not to include handwriting as a fundamental way to consolidate? I use that word again. Some people say instantiate into the brain these fundamentals of being literate. And so the challenge is how to maybe overlap activities so that they have a little more handwriting to them, and really look at what they're doing elsewhere. So if their phonemic awareness program is moving along, is there a way they can extend that to working with some kind of medium and paper to practice strokes or motions, just to develop the hand muscles and visual acuity? Or can they decide that their spelling program could overlap with a handwriting practice? But perhaps most importantly, I think teachers have to find a way, as they introduce letters, their names, their sounds, and teach those sound correspondences, and then teach that shape, the sequence of the strokes, and do that, I think, in relatively short time. But it's essentially phonics with a bonus, where they're teaching the phonics and decoding, and they're highlighting the letters, their shapes, where they begin, where they end, how they're made, and doing that whether it's simple as letter writing or scripting on the back of another student, or tracing, but finding ways that handwriting, it's not just sit down and write all the letters, but rather various media to allow students to practice this, knowing at the same time it's reinforcing, especially if you're saying the name of the letter, you're talking about the stroke sequence, you're highlighting things, what makes this letter hard to write, how do we do it so it's efficient, those kinds of directives, what they call oral directives about the letter, I think can be incorporated into the same phonics instruction that they're probably trying to provide.
That's really awesome. And one of the things that's great about Learning Without Tears, we have so many ways that we incorporate that. Our Handwriting Without Tears program, for example, just says, hey, 10 to 15 minutes a day is going to make a tremendous difference in students' confidence, but also ability to be able to form those letters, and also to be able to identify those letters for that matter when we're thinking about reading. So that, what are you finding in the research in terms of timing? How much time do we need?
Well, I'd like to answer the last part and then go back to something you said. But yeah, I found that even 8 to 10, 10 to 12, less than 15 minutes a day, depending on how efficient your little package is. And not all letters are created equal. So sometimes the more challenging letters might merit a little bit more time and attention. So I think it can be very efficient, and is really probably sitting there waiting to be, maximized by teachers in what they do. And I think it could enliven the instruction to have some of these more handwriting oriented activities interspersed. But I want to point out something that struck me when I was a teacher that maybe teachers don't realize about handwriting, and letters in general. Before children come to school, they live and function in a three-dimensional world. A chair is a chair, whether it's upside down, upside right, on its side, it's a chair. When students come to school, they are confronted with print, and print is not three-dimensional. So a B is a B. If it's the other way around, it's not a B. And so that's an adjustment cognitively for young children, that no longer is an entity dependent. Well, an entity is without dependence on its orientation, is what we say, right?
Sure.
So they come to school and they have to realize, oh, when the back is here first and then the belly, it's a B. If there's a belly and then a back, it's not a B, it's a D. So handwriting helps that visual spatial orientation to print that students need. And many teachers don't really stop to think about that. They know what a chair is, regardless of what orientation it's in, but they have to readjust, and can, to the fact that print has orientation, and handwriting and good instruction of it can help that. And then they quickly realize in 2 dimensions on a piece of paper where those strokes start, what direction they go, and where they end are important. And handwriting does that while they're learning the letters, their names, their sounds, and maybe some functions or rules about letters, depending on the sophistication of the phonics instruction.
I love that. We have several workshops that we've done, some professional learning that we've done to really talk about that paradigm shift from those 3-dimensional kinds of things to letters. So those are definitely available on our website. And we use at Learning Without Tears, in our Handwriting Without Tears program, we use things like, for example, the letter D that you mentioned. So B and D, D is a magic C letter. So we start with a magic C first, right? And so whereas a B is a diver letter, so it dives down, right? It turns and from an H into a B. So H is for honeybee. Things that we use to really support children in really understanding and holding on to those kinds of things. And when we think about really helping children become proficient readers and writers, obviously we think about phonemic awareness and we think about phonics. How does focusing on handwriting support phonemic awareness skills and phonics learning?
Well, I think that's a big topic.
Yes.
And the recent research is, I think, very impressive and very supportive of this integrated multimodal approach. But I'll just harken back to my early days. In a sense, writing is applied phonics. So if children can write the words that they're learning to read phonetically at first and so forth, it really shows they can apply those letter sound correspondences. So I'm a believer in having kids build words and then write words relatively quickly and in alignment with their phonics instruction. So that process, they have found that slowing down and mentally retrieving letter by letter to write down a word reinforces the name of the letter, the sound that it represents, and how it's working in the word. So I would want my instruction to enable students to write along with their reading competency. And there are just some programs or instructional decisions that separate reading and writing, and then you end up with students who read relatively well, but they're really behind in getting that on paper. So I think that's unfortunate, because I think they should develop in tandem, which means you have to have an early focus on handwriting itself, so that scratching out on paper becomes efficient and fluent. And then and at the same time, in doing that, they develop some legible handwriting that people can read and appreciate, and they feel confident about getting words down on paper, and then have something to say that should enhance their writer identities and enable them to, as I said, develop these skills together rather than well apart. And that's one unfortunate occurrence in the focus on phonemic awareness and phonics, that some people have left out handwriting, and I think disservice the way that those fundamental skills should grow together.
Sure. I love what you said. Handwriting is phonics applied, which is, applied phonics. That's certainly a wonderful soundbite. I love that. You mentioned also this multimodal learning, right? And learning without tears, that's one thing that we have done really masterful, right? We've really, I think all of our materials really make teaching and learning easy and fun because we use multimodal approaches to teaching and learning. How does a multimodal approach really apply to integrating handwriting into effective reading instruction?
Wow, that's a hefty question. So let me see how I would respond for teachers, okay? Let's try to keep in mind. So your question is, how does a multimodal approach support? Is that what you said?
Apply to integrating handwriting into reading instruction, but support would also work there too.
Yeah. Well, again, I think handwriting is necessary, and I think it's doable. And I actually think it diversifies maybe our instruction. I mean, teachers get into ruts sometimes, or routines, and we know that routines can be very helpful, especially for beginners. So I'm not disparaging, the use of this is what we do today, and we do it tomorrow, and we do it another day. Fortunately, programs such as yours help teachers, free teachers from doing the scope and sequence planning and thinking of, what am I going to do tomorrow? So given that support, that facilitation, I think teachers can then say, how do I enliven my instruction? And so looking at the visual, the motoric, even the oral, tell me how should I make my letter S, give me some pointers. I think there are ways that teachers can help students really think about what they're doing, and then that oral repetition, the handwriting practice in fun ways can enliven their instruction overall, and then again reinforce what they've already taught about phonics. They're practicing phonemic awareness when they're sounding out a word. If I dictate a word to a student like lamp, the student has to mentally retrieve lamp. I know that word. I know that thing. And how do I get that down on paper? And they have to hear the sound, identify it, isolate it, recall the the letter that represents it, and then even the stroke or how that letter is configured. I hope teachers can see that's essentially rehearsing phonemic awareness, phonics, and then getting it down on paper. And I've done this with students in a variety of ways. I'm very fond of letter and word building, and students like it. And you don't always have to be pencil to paper to make this happen. You can do it in fewer minutes, probably more words in fewer minutes if they're constructing words, but in a way you could still make it handwriting. They could trace that word that they've built. So if I've dictated lamp and they have some letters in front of them and they build that word lamp and they account for the letters there, I can ask questions about, which are the vowels and how many consonants, and let's trace that. And, which letter has the most parts. This overall awareness of how the system works, I think, is sort of the goal of strong multimodal integrated instruction. And at the same time, it should be lively and varied in the activities. And I know programs like yours strive to share ideas and suggestions for teachers. And then hopefully they can see it working with their students and continue to do it. Interestingly, this just came to mind, even research on the program Handwriting Without Tears. These interventions in some cases were done in 9 weeks. So it doesn't have to be every day, all the time, the whole year, but certainly a lot can be accomplished in a relatively concerted effort to teach handwriting and get those skills sufficiently efficient so that students can work with them. And again, hopefully the outcome would be reading and writing progress in tandem in a relatively short time. It's just that we receive a variety of students who have variable competencies, and sometimes we have to figure out, well, who really needs this? I think beginning students all benefit from a good instructional program in handwriting, and then it pays off. It pays off later on. And even with today's students, I still go into classrooms and work with students, and they may balk at having to do handwriting, but actually we can make it fun, and they start seeing its value and seeing themselves as more competent.
I love that. And it's so true. I find that it builds their confidence for sure. And like you said, they write more. And I think one of the things that's really great about our own program is that while again, you need those 9 weeks, as you mentioned, some of those studies are done. It's quick to teach it, but it also is handwriting all year. Like this is a skill that you're going to use on a regular basis. And if you need to do some recursive review, you can go back and do some of those things, which I think is really important. Now, you mentioned earlier that a lot of your background is with multilingual learners. And I'd love to know how handwriting and phonemic awareness and phonics learning, how they would support a child who is a multilingual learner.
Well, again, I felt that as a cognitivist, that all the students, regardless of their first language, deserved a good, solid introduction to the written code of English. And in some cases, Spanish, if that were the other language, but they're alphabetic languages, and they're based on a finite set of letters. And we have to remember that we're asking 5- and 6-year-olds to figure out 52 new symbols when they're in school. And that sheer number of letters, if you count lowercase and uppercase, there is some work to be done there. But I felt that my English language learners had a sense, because they didn't really read yet or write well in their first language, that English was just this massive system, so many words to learn. So they looked long, they looked strange, and they really didn't have their first language phonetics sorted out because they hadn't received formal instruction. And I think they just saw the system as wildly arbitrary and massive. So when I introduced a letter, its name, its sound, with the programs that we had adopted, and had them saying the letter name, practicing the sound, making a strong association, and then teaching them how to write the letter, all the time reinforcing the name, the sound, its makeup, if you will. I think they saw that as a very doable approach. And Spanish being a phonetic language, they were pretty quick to pick up that these letters, and they were glad to know that they didn't have to guess. They didn't have to just memorize all the words in the English language. They could become problem solvers with this new language. And the letters and their sounds and their shapes were the little components or the keys to mastering what they thought was an intimidating system. So I remember working with a third grader. She had been sent to me because she was not yet reading well in English, although her English fluency seemed pretty strong. But she had not been taught phonics, so she was just trying to remember every word she could see, and it wasn't working so well. Sure. Gave her some phonics instruction, and she told me, she said, "Why didn't people tell me this? This makes sense." So I guess there are enough logical minds out there that appreciate, give me the keys and we'll open the door and I can walk through. And she was just so impressed that there actually was a system that could be mastered in relatively short time, even for a third grader. But we shouldn't expect English language learners then to figure out the system on their own. I think it's unfair. It's unprofessional to say, I know how this system works, but I'm not going to share it with you. And I'm not going to give you sufficient practice, what I would call progressive practice, to come up to speed with this language. And so the other thing that I noticed with English language learner is really the segmenting that goes on with writing words down or the decoding. Really help their pronunciation of English words because they were attending to the parts and the individual phonemes. And so they became more precise. And of course, if you can do that in decoding a word you've never seen before, certainly when you're writing, that careful attention to the sounds, the phonemes in sequence and so forth, makes you far more accurate and successful. So I think it's just that extra attention to how the orthographic system in English works. It is doable. It can be daunting, but I think a strong program and exquisite instruction, which is what the research shows, can really help give these students the foundation that they deserve.
Yes. How powerful to share the system. And I love your analogy to giving them the keys so they could walk through the door. So finally, what are some practical ways that teachers can integrate handwriting into early reading instruction?
Well, of course, that's the gem, isn't it, Cheryl? And there are a lot of other people's professional educators out there, with their recommendations. So I'll name some and maybe highlight a few, but I think it is kind of fun to think of physically interactive ways to practice handwriting and then to develop it. Just a couple things. We have to realize that occupational therapists, like the founder of your program, have really looked at students, and we know that approximately 25, 30, maybe up to 40% of students struggle with handwriting. So this is not a small minority of students that, we hope somebody will catch and fix along the way. This is a significant number. And we know that those problems don't usually resolve on their own. They need instruction, and why not provide that to all of our young literacy learners. So there are things like how a student holds a pencil, and how situated must the student be in the chair to achieve good handwriting, legible handwriting. And some people get very strict about that. I think for the most part, we don't want to perpetuate bad habits. And some students, because they were given markers when they were 18 months, have developed some bad habits. Just as an analogy, I used to teach children swimming. And swimming is a motoric, the physiological, kinesthetic combination of skills, just like handwriting.
Sure.
And when I taught students who had never really been in the pool, of course, there was some coaxing and encouraging that was required. But I also had students who had indoor pools in their homes. And frankly, they were harder to teach to swim well than the newbies, because they had picked up such bad habits flopping around the family pool. So like swimming, handwriting, I think is better if we give them good, clean, clear instruction, that they don't develop, a really inefficient grip, paper placement, and those kinds of things. So I think programs can help say, this is what research seems to show makes for better handwriting. Let's try to do it well from the start. But in that process, there are a couple things. I used to teach handwriting, and I would emphasize the 5 S's. Maybe you could guess what some of them are. But I think instruction has to target letter shape. That's the first S in my book. But they have to target shape, or what some people call form, because that's what distinguishes an M from an H, or a W from a V. So they have to pay attention to shape. And that can be done, on the, do we have any chalkboards? But, on the whiteboard, in sand, in dry Jello. There are lots of media that you could do this. Cornstarch with water, where they can just get the feel of the letter, paying attention to its parts and its sequence. So I think there are a lot of kinesthetic things that can happen. People use sandpaper letters, bubble wrap letters, where they're feeling the shape. And not all students need a lot of that, but it can enliven instruction to students. One of my favorites was, we worked hard in our classroom and we were busy. And by Friday, the desks were kind of grimy. So on Friday afternoon for handwriting, I would put shaving cream, plop some shaving cream on the top of that dirty desk, and then instruct them to, write their names, and then write, Monday, or what other words should we write, or practice this new letter. And in the process, we cleaned all the desk, and I was a hit with the janitor. So the students liked it. It was something different. And that even the first, second, third graders kind of like that notion that they're cleaning the desk, practicing their handwriting, and getting a little goopy there on Friday afternoon.
Sure.
So we would talk about shape and how that was important. And then when students had the shapes of the letters, then of course we have to get size. That there are tall letters and short letters, and we have to attend to that. And sometimes those can meld together. In the emphasis that I gave, then we looked at what some people call alignment or stance, or really how the letters sit on lines, because that matters too. And so we did shape, size, their stance, sometimes I called it that, but where they are on the line. But we have to worry about spacing, which is an issue for children. And that can be a helpful indicator if a child's having difficulty. If letters are on top of letters and crossing over, or some letters are huge and other letters are small, those are indicators that maybe more work needs to be done there. And then, of course, we wanted to move to, if it were cursive, slant as an S, and eventually speed And so you need enough activities to make this a fluent process. So eventually teachers have to be concerned about handwriting speed. But anyway, I don't know if that's answered your questions. Those are a few things. As your program does, introduce letters by their stroke sequence, or do they start in the same place? Do they start as one letter and then turn into another, like a G? It starts like a C and then sort of becomes more like an A, and then we have that tail and so forth. I think that oral directive, those descriptions of the letters, can be very, very helpful.
And would you, Kit, as you're doing a reading instruction, would you incorporate these kinds of things?
Well, as a cognitivist, I think teachers should be good cognitive coaches, which means they're evidencing their thinking so that the students can hear that and see that in action. So if they're talking about making the letter, telling where it starts and where it goes and how it should hit lines or sit on lines, however the program might describe this, because good work has been done to give the verbal directions or instructions that can help students.
I love that, because it basically allows them to be more metacognitive as well.
Exactly, yeah.
About their own thinking, yeah.
Yeah, it helps them be aware. And so I'll share, this was a fairly recent example of a student. So I was asked to come into a first grade classroom and work with the lowest, the weaker, most needy writers in that group. And there were 9 students from a first grade classroom. That's a lot to be considered sort of behind the group and needing extra attention. And they all needed some work on handwriting because they were essentially carving out letters sort of kind of on a paper and not really composing anything yet. They weren't generating text because they were carving out letters. And so we did some handwriting practice. And one of the activities was not tedious work, but let's say write 4 S's or 4 K's in this case it was. And we talked about the letter, the name, its sound, maybe some words it starts with to reinforce the phonics of it. And then they were, tell me how to make it, where do you start, just to rehearse what they had been taught. And then they wrote 4 or 5 on a piece of paper. And I said, now take a look at your K's. Which ones do you think is your very best? And these kids, I said, circle or put a box. And putting the box is helpful because they see how all letters really should fit into a rectangular box. Short box, tall box, but the boxes should not vary too much in size across letters. So they were making their box around their best. And then I said, so which one not your best? And say, why isn't, what happened? And I remember this little first grader, and he's looking at his K's and he's boxed up his best. And then he looks and he points to this K. I said, so not so good? He said, not my best. And I said, what's wrong with it? He says, it's kind of wrinkly. So he realized that those straight lines that are intended to compose a K were crooked. So I thought that was insightful. So even a first grader, a lower achieving writing first grader, could self-assess and realize what it takes to make a good K, and hopefully that would improve. So I said, well, make another good K that's not so wrinkly. And in pretty quick terms, he was able to remediate his K writing.
That is an incredible story. I love that idea. And I love the fact that the children really, when using this kind of technique, if you will, while you're teaching reading instruction, it really allows for them, again, to self-assess, to really think about their own thinking. I love that. And I know, Kit, you are going to actually be writing a blog for us that really kind of highlights a lot of this research base that we're talking about. So I'm super excited to possibly work with you on that and to get that into our listeners' hands as well. It has been an absolute pleasure learning from you today and talking to you about this most important topic.
Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for this opportunity. I do get excited about what I think is effective and efficient instruction for students, and I commend teachers who are out there trying to make it all happen for our youngsters, but also want to encourage them to consider ways to, what I would say, sophisticate or elevate their instruction. And I think more integration of handwriting could be really powerful for their early literacy programs.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Kit. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.